When an avoidant and their partner stop talking the hidden truth, you know that moment. When the texts stop, the calls stop, the conversations go from deep and vulnerable to nothing. One of you pulls away, the other leans in, and before you know it, the space between you isn't just physical, it's emotional. It's mental. It's like you're living on two different planets. This isn't just silence. This is protective silence. And more often than not, it's a dance between someone with avoidant tendencies and someone who just wants to feel safe and connected. But here's the hidden truth. The avoidant isn't always running because they don't care. And their partner isn't always chasing because they're needy. Sometimes the avoidant shuts down because they care too much. The fear of being consumed, judged, or not enough makes them withdraw. They've learned to equate closeness with risk, so silence feels like safety. And the partner, the one left in the quiet, they're not begging for attention, they're searching for security. They want to know, are we okay? Am I too much? Do I even matter anymore? So when the talking stops, it's not just about the words, it's about the stories both people start to tell themselves in the silence. The avoidant tells themselves, if I speak, I'll lose myself. Their partner tells themselves, if I don't fix this, I'll lose them. But the truth, you lose each other either way if neither of you speaks the truth. The key isn't to force closeness or punish distance. It's to create safety for both people. Safety to be honest, safety to feel, safety to not get it right the first time. So if you're in that silence right now, ask yourself not how do I make them talk, but what am I afraid they'll say? And maybe more importantly, what would I say if I wasn't afraid of losing them? Because the real relationship doesn't begin when you start talking again. It begins when you're both brave enough to be heard. When communication stops between an avoidant partner and their significant other, it's easy to mistake the silence for indifference. But in many cases, silence isn't a sign that nothing is happening, it's a powerful form of self-protection. For someone with avoidant attachment tendencies, withdrawing isn't about punishing the other person or ghosting them out of cruelty. It's a reflex, a deeply rooted survival mechanism that often stems from past emotional experiences where closeness felt dangerous, overwhelming, or even suffocating. Imagine growing up or living in a dynamic where showing need, emotion, or dependence resulted in being judged, dismissed, or abandoned. Over time, your nervous system begins to equate closeness with vulnerability and vulnerability with pain. So instead of leaning in when things get intense or emotionally charged, you pull away, not to harm the other person, but to protect yourself. You create distance to regulate overwhelming internal states that you may not even fully understand. Silence becomes a way to find stability, to avoid conflict, and to regain a sense of control. To an outsider or to the partner on the other side, the silence can feel like a wall. Cold, confusing, and sometimes heartbreaking, but for the avoidant, it's more like armor. It's not that they don't have feelings, it's that they may not have the tools to process those feelings safely, especially in the presence of someone they care about deeply. Ironically, the more they care, the more threatened they might feel because caring opens the door to potential loss, judgment, or exposure. When a partner tries to reconnect, perhaps asking questions, seeking emotional validation, or expressing distress, the avoidant may experience that as pressure. Even well-intentioned gestures can feel intrusive. Then we can begin to address the real issues beneath it. Because no meaningful reconnection happens until both people feel seen, not just for how they act, but for what's driving those actions underneath. When someone with avoidant tendencies pulls away in a relationship, it's often misinterpreted as a lack of care or emotional coldness. The partner left in the silence may wonder, why are they distancing themselves if they love me? But the reality is more complex. Avoidants don't pull away because they don't feel, they pull away because they feel too much. And those feelings, love, closeness, vulnerability, can be deeply uncomfortable, even threatening for someone who associates intimacy with loss of control or emotional exposure. Avoidant individuals often develop their attachment style through early experiences where emotional needs weren't met in a consistent or safe way. Perhaps they learned that being vulnerable led to rejection, that expressing emotions led to conflict, or that needing someone made them weak. Over time, their survival strategy became self-sufficiency. Relying on others felt dangerous, so they trained themselves to need less, express less, and retreat when emotions ran high. This isn't conscious cruelty, it's conditioning. So when they enter a close relationship and start to feel emotionally attached, it can trigger the very alarm bells they've spent years silencing. The deeper the emotional bond grows, the more exposed they feel. That's the paradox. The more they care, the more likely they are to back away. Love doesn't calm their nervous system, it activates it. Their instincts scream, this is too close, too much. You're losing yourself. And so they disconnect not because they don't want connection, but because they don't yet know how to be connected without compromising their sense of emotional safety. This is why you might experience moments of deep intimacy with an avoidant partner followed by sudden coldness or withdrawal. It's not that the closeness wasn't real. It's that the closeness was real enough to activate fear. When things feel intense during conflict, vulnerability, or even moments of happiness, they pull back, hoping to regulate the overwhelming wave of emotion by creating space. That space isn't about punishing the other person, it's about trying to regain a sense of stability. From the partner's side, this can be incredibly confusing. It feels personal. It feels like abandonment. But understanding the avoidant's inner world can shift that perspective. When they disappear into silence, they're not necessarily shutting down the relationship, they're shutting down the parts of themselves that feel too exposed. It's a defense mechanism, not a declaration of emotional detachment. The journey forward requires patience, not pressure. You can't force an avoidant to stay open by chasing them. It only reinforces their fear of being engulfed. What they need isn't ultimatums or emotional demands. They need to learn, often slowly and gently, that it's possible to be close and safe at the same time. That love doesn't mean losing oneself, and that sharing emotions doesn't always lead to pain. At its core, avoidance isn't about a lack of love. It's about a fear of how love might undo them. Recognizing this doesn't solve everything, but it opens the door to compassion. And in a space of compassion, real healing and real connection can begin. When someone in a relationship reaches out during a period of silence or emotional distance, it's often seen, especially by the avoidant partner, as neediness or being too much. But in reality, that pursuit isn't about trying to control or overwhelm. It's about seeking connection, reassurance, and emotional safety. The partner leaning in isn't desperate for attention, they're desperate for clarity, for confirmation that the relationship still has ground beneath it. And that desire for closeness is not a weakness, it's a deeply human response to perceived emotional danger. For someone who's more secure or anxious in their attachment style, distance feels threatening. It raises alarm bells. Silence is not interpreted as space to think, it's interpreted as something is wrong. And when the avoidant partner withdraws, the instinctive response of the other is to close the gap, to ask questions, to try to talk, to reach out again and again, hoping to restore the connection that once felt secure. It might come across as pushing or pressuring, but underneath that behavior is a fundamental need. I need to know we're still okay. This reaction is often deeply misunderstood. In our culture, especially with the rise of emotional independence rhetoric, need has become a dirty word. But emotional needs aren't flaws, they're signals. When a partner tries to communicate or reconnect during conflict or distance, they're often saying, I care about this. I care about us. And I don't want to lose you. That doesn't make them needy, it makes them invested. Unfortunately, avoidant individuals may not interpret it that way. To them, any sign of emotional demand can feel like a threat to their autonomy. They may feel cornered, overwhelmed, or like they're being asked to give something they're not emotionally equipped to give in that moment. I care about this. I care about us. And I don't want to lose you. That doesn't make them needy, it makes them invested. Unfortunately, avoidant individuals may not interpret it that way. To them, any sign of emotional demand can feel like a threat to their autonomy. They may feel cornered, overwhelmed, or like they're being asked to give something they're not emotionally equipped to give in that moment. So they pull further away, and the more they withdraw, the more anxious their partner may become. This creates a painful push-pull dynamic. One person seeks connection, the other seeks space. One reaches out, the other recoils, and both end up feeling misunderstood, unseen, and emotionally unsafe. But if we can reframe the partner's pursuit not as a form of pressure, but as a cry for stability, everything changes. They're not trying to control, they're trying to anchor. They're not trying to invade, they're trying to feel close. The intensity of their effort often reflects the depth of their emotional investment, not a lack of self-worth. In healthy relationships, it's not about one person needing less and the other needing more. It's about understanding the why behind each person's behavior, and the partner who seeks reassurance isn't wrong for wanting that. It's not an overreaction to want to feel emotionally connected to someone you care about. If anything, it's a sign of emotional courage to keep reaching out, even when met with silence. Recognizing that pursuit as a search for safety rather than as a flaw can build empathy, soften defensiveness, and open a path for real communication. It reminds us that behind every bid for attention is a hope that we still matter. When communication breaks down in a relationship, especially between someone with avoidant tendencies and their partner, it's rarely just about the words that aren't being said. The real damage comes from the stories both people start telling themselves in the silence. Because when we're left without answers, we create our own. And those imagined narratives can be far more painful, confusing, and damaging than the actual truth. For the partner who leans in, the one more likely to pursue connection, the silence becomes fertile ground for self-doubt. Without reassurance or clarity, they may begin to internalize the distance. They might think, maybe I did something wrong, or I must be too much, or even they don't love me anymore. These thoughts don't just appear randomly, they grow out of fear, vulnerability, and a desperate attempt to make sense of something that feels emotionally unsafe. At the same time, the avoidant partner who is pulled away for space might be telling themselves a completely different story. Maybe they're thinking, if I come back and talk, we'll fight again, or I can't express myself without being misunderstood, or even getting close means giving up my freedom. They may justify their silence as a way to keep the peace, believing that saying nothing is better than saying something that might escalate the situation. But here's the problem: when two people stop communicating, they don't just lose the connection. They lose context. And without context, both start filling in the blanks with their deepest insecurities. The partner who's anxious fills it with fear of abandonment. The avoidant fills it with fear of entrapment. And those internal narratives begin to drive behavior. The partner becomes more reactive, more emotional, or more distant in return. The avoidant becomes more withdrawn, more closed off, or more convinced that they need to stay silent to protect themselves. In this way, silence becomes a breeding ground for misinterpretation, and those misinterpretations start to rewrite the story of the relationship. What might have been a small moment of disconnection turns into a perceived rejection. A temporary pause becomes proof of emotional danger, and each person's actions start to reinforce the other's worst fears. This cycle can go on for days, weeks, or even longer, and the longer it lasts, the harder it becomes to reach across the emotional distance, because by then, both people are operating from assumptions, not reality, and the deeper those assumptions take root, the more rigid they become. The truth is, silence doesn't stay neutral for long. It speaks even when no one is talking. It speaks through unanswered texts, through long gaps between interactions, through the subtle withdrawal of energy and affection. And what it often says, if not addressed, is something far more painful than either person ever intended. That's why emotional clarity matters, because without it, silence doesn't protect, it divides. And in the absence of truth, our minds rarely tell comforting stories. They tell the stories we fear most. In relationships where emotional distance and silence have taken root, especially between someone with avoidant tendencies and a partner seeking connection, it's natural to want to fix things quickly, to have the conversation, to hash it out, to get the answers, but pushing for a solution too soon often backfires. What both people need before any healing can happen is emotional safety. Without safety, words become weapons, not bridges. Conversations become battles, not pathways to understanding. Emotional safety means each person feels secure enough to express their truth without fearing rejection, judgment, or punishment. For the avoidant partner, this is critical. If they sense that any moment of honesty will lead to confrontation or emotional overwhelm, they're far more likely to retreat. They've learned that intimacy can be dangerous, that showing vulnerability might invite criticism or pressure. So they protect themselves by staying quiet, staying distant. And if they feel like they're going to be pulled into a conversation where they'll be misunderstood or pushed before they're ready, they shut down even further. On the other side, the partner seeking connection also needs to feel safe. Safe to express concern, to ask for reassurance, to be emotional without being labeled as needy or overly sensitive, if their vulnerability is dismissed or minimized. So they protect themselves by staying quiet, staying distant. And if they feel like they're going to be pulled into a conversation where they'll be misunderstood or pushed before they're ready, they shut down even further. On the other side, the partner seeking connection also needs to feel safe. Safe to express concern, to ask for reassurance, to be emotional without being labeled as needy or overly sensitive, if their vulnerability is dismissed or minimized. But because someone made it feel safe enough. That starts with empathy, with slowing down, with listening not just to respond, but to understand. Safety also means letting go of the urgency to fix the relationship in a single conversation. People need space to process. Sometimes the avoidant partner doesn't even know why they're shutting down until they feel calm enough to explore it. And the partner seeking connection often needs time to sort through their own emotional responses before they can ask for what they truly need rather than react from fear. It's in those quiet, patient moments when both people feel seen and respected that the real work happens, not in shouting matches or text marathons, but in shared spaces of gentleness, in tone, in timing, and small signs that say you're safe with me, even if we don't have all the answers yet. Only then can honest, healing conversation begin. Not forced, not reactive, just real. When both people feel emotionally safe, vulnerability becomes possible. And when vulnerability is met with care rather than fear, the foundation for reconnection is laid piece by piece by piece. Thank you for taking the time to reflect on something so real, so personal, and often so misunderstood. If you've seen yourself in these words, or if you've seen someone you love, then you've already taken a step toward greater awareness, and that matters more than you know. Be kind to yourself, be patient with others, and remember, silence may feel like the end, but with empathy, courage, and emotional safety, it can also be the beginning of something more honest than you've ever had before. Take care of your heart. And thank you for listening. Until next time, stay grounded, stay open, and stay true to the connection you deserve.